from 14.5% to maybe 16 or 16.5 in order to prepare the country for GST. That didn't happen. So I think there are a lot of pluses which we see in this budget, and even the markets also have hinted at that.
Thank you so much. Very quick comments that you have given, and the 2 points that you touched upon, we'll come back to them, including the issue of long-term capital gains, and I have something to add there subsequently for the benefit for the audience. And of course, the service tax bit, which raises a larger question as to what happens to the goods and services tax. And you know that in the last 48 hours after the budget speech, we have already had 2 different versions of the introduction date that have been offered to us, but we'll come back to that theme later on. I'm going to go to my left, in fact, and try and balance it out and get Chandresh to start off with his opening comments. Over to you, Chandresh.
Yeah, so I think if one were to look at holistically and just say a little from a distance of what one feels when you've seen this budget, I think the one word which comes to me is relief. And I want to get into that. I don't think there were any great expectations from the budget, especially if you were to look at from a market's perspective. The market went into this budget with very low expectations. But yes, there were lots of worries. A couple of them have already been mentioned by Anil, so I won't go into that. But from my perspective, I think there were 3 things, or let's say 3 challenges as we were facing as an economy, in which we wanted this budget to address these three important things. And I cannot commend the finance minister enough for sticking to that 3.5% fiscal deficit number. I think in this environment, when there is low growth and there's problem and every country is trying to pump prime or get some growth out of in their economies, I think just the fact that he did not yield into the temptation, and it would have been, I think, reasonably well understood by the market because of the difficult conditions, because of the fact that there is a pay commission award, because of the fact that he had to do something for the rural sector where there is significant stress. I think just the fact that you stuck to 3.5% is, I think, a very, very big statement. Not because it affects the fiscal deficit too much, but more in terms of credibility. I think one of the things which, if you talk to most business people, whether local business people or international business people, is people have kind of written off India as somebody who's not transparent, there's no credibility. And I think this should go a long way in kind of assuaging some of those concerns. It will obviously not do everything, but I think it's a very, very bold step in saying that, okay, last year we said we will be at 3.5. We are sticking to 3.5 despite all the problems we have. And then next year they've already given out that it's going to be 3%. So of the 3 things, first is obviously the fiscal number, and I think full marks on that. The second issue is about rural stress. Yes, so that's a big one. We know that there has been a problem, 2 failed monsoons, very little increase in MSPs. Large parts of the country is really, really struggling. So there's enough there. I think I don't want to go too much into it in the immediate beginning comments, but the nature of the spend on the rural side is not just a handout that you just increase the MNREGA and just dole out money on crop insurance, etc. There is enough there on roads and irrigation, etc., which is more on infrastructure building. The third problem, and that is actually a deep-rooted problem, right, and everywhere in the world, and more so in our case, especially looking at the fact that we are aspiring to be a 6 to 8% kind of growth economy, is the lack of investment demand. Now, the government has obviously done enough through the rail budget, through the allocation to roads, etc., to have a reasonably meaningful number. The big problem is how do you get the private sector into the to come and start to spend and do capital expenditure or put in investments. So I think that's where longer term problems remain. And that has got little to do with the budget, but more on the policies, the Make in India, the ease of doing business in India, clearer. And so there is some stuff which is an aspirational stuff that they want to ease out processes, reduce the flexibility of, let's say, income tax officials, take away high-handedness and cut red tapeism. Intent is there, so that's, I would also say that's a good one. Results of that obviously depend on execution. So overall, I think a very good budget. The relief obviously for all the negatives we were expecting or what was in the press obviously hasn't come true, so that's kind of fine. So overall, I think from a market's perspective, great budget. Even from general economy, even as a political statement, I think it does and says the right things.
Thank you so much. Very important points that you make there. The three sort of key pillars of the budget, and of course the finance minister read out 9 of them, and we'll come back to some of the points that you raised, including about the fiscal deficit number, because again, as the fine print gets absorbed, there are questions that are emerging about certain expenditure side commitments and how, or if not, whether they have been captured in the budget document. Divyesh Lapsiwala is also here. We already introduced you. The audience knows you, but he's here now. What I'm now going to do is to go across to Mr. Balasubramanian for his opening comments. Over to you.
Yeah. I think, of course, more or less echo what Chopra ji and Chandresh mentioned. The way I read is, so one is not something which is a thoughtful thing that we every year we expect something will come, therefore it will have a huge impact in the way we look at way forward. I think that nothing was there, which is essentially continuing the broad philosophy of maintaining stability in terms of various policy frameworks. And that's something which I think it goes to say that you need to maintain the sanctity of what the government of India has to do with respect to their spending. There's a lot more controls that they brought in terms of unnecessary spending, where normally they increase the expenditure significantly without looking at the revenue. And that, I think, is normally comes. I think when we say 3.5% fiscal, normally we go back and start looking at the numbers with the lens, and then we come back and then say these numbers is not achievable, this cannot be done, that cannot be done. Therefore, if I add up all the math, it doesn't come to 3.5, it will come to 3.7. This is historically I have seen, we as a money manager, we always go back and then say, find enough reasons why the number cannot be believed. And this time for a change, no such things were there. I think you do any math, there is one math says, yes, it's not achievable. If you look at another math, which is basically in excess duty collections, he's not been very aggressive. So therefore, if you add up these two things, the net sum is 0. So therefore, one has to have some belief what they are saying is true. Second is, I think this budget, I was jokingly telling somebody in the afternoon, of course, I have both the side consultants sitting on both the end. My belief is this budget, they have removed a lot of these so-called grey areas. And they have gone and explained, removed the sections, rather streamlined the section in such a manner, you and me do not interpret the way we have to interpret to suit us. And they have given a very clear clarification in some of the sections which are generally being interpreted historically. A case in point, I'll tell you, is a holding company which is basically in the holding company has got investments in equity. The income tax authorities always says that you have a holding company, you have investment business, whatever you borrow in that business, the expenditure that you have in that business, I can't treat them as an expenditure. Then what will you treat? So, but income tax authority has got an authority right to say that it cannot be treated as an expenditure. Therefore, I will not allow you to take this expenditure and adjust against the income. And this budget has killed that. So basically, it's a black and white. As if it is an expenditure, take an expenditure, deduct it from your income, and pay tax, and what is left. There are many such regulations. They have looked at sections and deep dive and see to it those things are not again coming back, giving more leeway for the income tax authorities to run after everybody. I think that's something which is done, which I see a big positive. And second is, I think with respect to the rural, I think Chandresh also mentioned about very high focus on rural. There are one or two things in my view, I think is coming pretty big time. I think the second largest subsidies in the country is the fertilizer subsidy. First, of course, subsidy is the food subsidies. and second is fertilizer subsidy, and the rest all come. The last few years, the government has done a fantastic job about reducing the subsidies in fuel, LPG, and so on and so forth. And they continue to focus on that, then how to actually differentiate on the subsidies between the rich and the poor. And they are taking some bold steps in announcing a pilot project on fertilizer subsidy that is being given, whether it reaches the poor or whether it reaches the rich farmers.